Hello. Today's poem we're considering is To My Dear and Loving Husband by Anne Bradstreet. Before we start, if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, it would be greatly appreciated if you would. Thank you so much. I have the poem here, so let's start. If ever two were one, then surely we. If ever man were loved by wife, then thee. If ever wife was happy in a man, compare with me, ye women, if you can. I prize thy love more than whole mines of gold, or all the riches that the east doth hold. My love is such that rivers cannot quench, nor aught but love from thee give recompense. Thy love is such I can no way repay. The heavens reward thee manifold, I pray. Then while we live in love, let's so persever, that when we live no more, we may live ever. This poem, an unashamed declaration of love, has many layers, and interesting for many different reasons. There's plenty to unpack, so let's start. This unashamed declaration of love is unusual because, unlike many love poems, it isn't bemoaning lost or unattainable love, nor is it written in the first throes of love. On the contrary, the poem is written by a wife to her husband many years into a marriage, and she declares her total devotion to him. The first three lines begin with if ever, an example of anaphora, a rhetorical device used to stress the important points the speaker is making about her marriage and love for her husband. Using anaphora makes the poem elegant and formal, highlighting that what she says is important and sincere. Using end-stop lines, for example lines 1 and 2, make her points direct and declarative. The balance and elegance of the poem's lines demonstrate that the poet has given much thought to what she needs to tell her husband, demonstrating her devotion to him. If ever two were one, then surely we. If ever man were loved by wife, then thee. If ever wife was happy in a man. The poem's speaker is undoubtedly Anne Bradstreet, and therefore the poem is autobiographical. It is written in the first person voice, the most intimate and personal form of writing. Additionally, in the first three lines of the poem, the speaker directly addresses her husband using apostrophe. Apostrophe is a technique where the speaker addresses someone or something absent or incapable of replying. Using apostrophe gives the poem the feel of a passionate and intimate declaration of love, as though the reader is privy to the speaker's innermost thoughts and feelings concerning her husband. The first person inclusive pronoun we stresses the intimacy of the couple, that they are united, a partnership. Placing we at the end of the first line makes it prominent and stresses its importance. In line 2, thee, an archaic form of you, placed at the end of the line, stresses her husband's importance to her and cements through rhyme the earlier we in line 1, we and thee. In lines 3 and 4, Bradstreet declares her happiness in her marriage. It compares well with any other love other women may hold for their husbands. If ever wife was happy in a man, compare with me, ye women, if you can. Bradstreet challenges ye women to compare their marriages to hers. This shift in the poem's use of apostrophe from directly addressing a specific person, her husband, to talking to all women demonstrates the poet wants to introduce universal and timeless themes, the themes of love and marriage. While the speaker may sound boastful, it reflects her need to declare her love and happiness to her husband and to other women. It indicates that despite being married a long time, she retains the self-assured manner of those newly in love, who often feel that their love is better than everyone else's, and no one has ever loved or felt as much love as she. It shows us that her love for her husband remains undiminished despite the passing of time. In lines 5 to 7, the poet uses elevated language, using hyperbole, exaggeration, to emphasize her love for her spouse. I prize thy love more than whole mines of gold, or all the riches that the east doth hold. My love is such that rivers cannot quench. She uses whole mines of gold and that rivers cannot quench to stress the depth of her love for her husband. Gold signifies how precious he is to her and how much she values him. Rivers cannot quench underlines that her love is limitless and insatiable. The speaker refers to all the riches that the East doth hold, a familiar trope of 17th century writing, where lands east of Europe are represented as exotic, wealthy and sensual. She uses the East as a symbol of such earthly forms of desire. In doing so, she emphasizes the piety and purity of her love by implicitly contrasting it with the sensual, earthly pleasures she rejects for her husband's love. As the poem progresses, the speaker considers the relationship between her love for her husband and her religious faith. This is not surprising, given Anne Bradstreet's Puritan faith and religion's central role in people's lives in this period. This shift begins in line 7, where the speaker alludes to the biblical love poem Song of Solomon, which says, "Many waters cannot quench love." Song of Solomon is a highly charged, erotic and sensual biblical poem. Through this allusion, the speaker associates her love with the Bible's presentation of love. And as she notes that rivers cannot quench her desire for her husband, she subtly suggests that her love is undying and will live after her short time on earth has passed. She is likely implying her love for him contains sexual desires, undiminished despite their long time together. The speaker refers to her marriage as a prize and compares it to riches and gold. This is really important for an understanding of the concept of marriage in the 17th century. These are material riches, the kind of wealth that one uses during life. This is perhaps unsurprising given the period in which Bradstreet wrote the poem. At this point in history, the ideal of marriage as a partnership built on love had not yet fully emerged, and many people treated marriage as a simple financial transaction. But Anne Bradstreet rebels against this notion of marriage. She stresses its non-financial rewards and only uses comparisons to material wealth to show how much she loves her husband. For example, lines 8 and 9. Nor aught but love from thee give recompense. Thy love is such I can no way repay. Here Bradstreet declares her gratitude for his love, which she cannot repay, because she is richer for his love. That Bradstreet mentions her husband returns her love reflects that at this time often marriages were loveless relationships. Marriage was transactional. Many married not for love but for financial reasons. For the rich, marriage was a means to acquire wealth or property, which often came with the bride, as a dowry, a gift of money, property, or land. For women, it brought financial security and status. This practice continued throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, described perfectly in Jane Austen's novels Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion. Marrying for money likely accounts for Bradstreet's use of words associated with finance: gold, riches, recompense, repay. Bradstreet makes this association to state categorically that their relationship is different. It is pure, based not on financial gain, but built on love. In line 9, she states that although she cannot repay her husband's love in material wealth, he will receive his reward in the afterlife. It's worth noting that she seeks reward only for her husband and seeks nothing for herself, demonstrating that her love is unselfish, putting the other's needs before her own. The final 4 lines are where the poem makes its boldest claims about marriage. For the first 8 lines of the poem, the speaker has largely talked about her marriage in earthly terms. Now it addresses salvation, heaven, and the afterlife. In the poem's final 4 lines, she makes a strong case that marriage will help her and her husband achieve salvation. In doing so, she implicitly opposes other Puritan poets, like George Herbert, who often argue that salvation requires relinquishing earthly love in favour of divine love. But Anne Bradstreet is having none of that. She strongly disagrees. For her, earthly love and divine love are closely linked together. Lines 10 to 12 balance material considerations with spiritual. Here Bradstreet considers the afterlife and how their love will fare there. The heavens reward thee manifold, I pray. Then while we live in love, let's so persevere, that when we live no more, we may live ever. In lines 10 and 11, the speaker says she hopes that although she cannot repay him in material wealth, she wishes he receives his rewards manifold, many times over, in the afterlife. In line 11, then while we live in love, let's so persevere. She shares her hope that as a couple they will work hard to ensure their love continues. They will work hard to persevere. The speaker also asks that they make the most of every day. This notion introduces the theme of Carpe Diem, seize the day, that they should harvest every moment of their lives together. In this respect, the poem sits well with her male contemporaries, John Donne and Andrew Marvell, who introduced the theme of Carpe Diem in their work. However, they often do so for carnal purposes, to convince their lovers to enjoy the pleasures of the flesh today and not hesitate to have sex with them because they could all be dead tomorrow. Andrew Marvell's poem To His Coy Mistress is a fine example of the Carpe Diem theme being used to persuade. It is easy to understand how the notion of Carpe Diem was pervasive and persuasive in the 17th century, in a world beset by plague and other deathly diseases, where life was short and brutal. Bradstreet introduces the theme to highlight life's brevity and the need to make the most of each day. The final line, that when we live no more, we may live ever, looks ahead to when they will die, and she hopes that after death their love will continue eternally. Lines 10 to 12 reflect Anne Bradstreet's religious faith in an afterlife. She unquestioningly believes their earthly love will continue in the afterlife because it is strong and has a spiritual element on earth, where they are even now soulmates. By mentioning the afterlife and her love on the same line, she equates, places on the same footing, heavenly happiness and the happiness loving her husband brings her. In lines 11 and 12, caesura, a natural break, stresses the division between life and death. Then while we live, in love let's so persevere, that when we live no more, we may live ever. On line 11, stress on the final syllable, sever, compounds this division as life is severed and replaced by an afterlife. At its heart, To My Dear and Loving Husband is a simple declaration of love and reflected in its simple rhyming. The use of 6 rhyming couplets fittingly supports the theme of couples bound together by love. Using rhyming couplets that employ iambic pentameter make them heroic couplets, a form used when discussing important subjects. Bradstreet's use of heroic couplets stresses her high regard for her husband and their love. Regarding the poem's technique and structure, at the start of its first 3 lines, the speaker repeats the phrase, if ever. This use of anaphora sets the stakes for the poem. The speaker isn't simply praising her marriage on its own terms, rather she is measuring it against all marriages, ever. Further, anaphora binds together these lines to build on each other, becoming a single argument for the unique power and value of the speaker's marriage. This effect is strengthened by the poem's simultaneous use of assonance, with a strong pattern of E and E sounds through the first 4 lines. This sense of being separate and together mirrors the speaker's claim. She and her husband are individuals, but they also form a unit. Importantly, the poem features a woman's voice and a woman's perspective on love. This was rare at the time. However, in a social context, it shows the secondary role of women in the 17th century because, like many women writers, Anne Bradstreet had to publish anonymously, and this poem was published after her death. The poet uses many end-stop lines that make her points clear and concise, which fits the Puritan ethos of unadorned style and simplicity. For example, then while we live in love let's so persevere, that when we live no more we may live ever. The poem is written in Iambic Pentameter. Iambic Pentameter is often found in English poem, especially poets Bradstreet admired, including Shakespeare and Spenser. It employs 10 syllables, with the stress usually falling on the first, third, fifth, seventh and ninth syllables. Iambic pentameter creates a rhythm that closely mimics the rhythm of English speech. Using iambic pentameter creates a conversational style, and we can almost hear the poet speaking to her husband and to ye women. While Bradstreet's stresses do not follow conventional iambic patterns, they create a variety that mimics English speech. Further, because we do not always stress our speech in an ordered manner. To My Dear and Loving Husband is a poem in rhyming couplets. None of the poem's rhymes occurs in more than one couplet. AA, BB, CC, DD, EE, FF. It generally uses strong, direct rhymes, most of which are one syllable. These strong rhymes convey a sense of confidence and self-assurance because the speaker is making bold claims about marriage. For example, lines 7 to 8. My love is such that rivers cannot quench, nor aught but love from thee give recompense. Quench and recompense might seem slant rhymes, not quite perfect. Yet if we make allowance for accent and how these words may have been spoken in 17th century England and America, they are probably perfect rhymes. Like many of Bradstreet's poems, To My Dear and Loving Husband is almost certainly autobiographical. Bradstreet does not pretend that she and the speaker are somehow separate or distant from each other. Instead, she speaks directly in her own voice. Indeed, because the poem was only published posthumously, and because the poems published in her lifetime were published without her permission, there is something voyeuristic about reading this poem. It is addressed to a specific person, Simon Bradstreet, Anne's husband, and written in the context of a specific relationship between two real people, and possibly, despite her address to ye women on line 4, Bradstreet never intended anyone but her husband to read it. The poem treats her marriage with her husband in generic and idealised terms. The reader does not learn much about him, their daily routines, or how they fell in love. Though the reader does not learn much about Bradstreet's marriage, they learn that it models the virtues of marriage more broadly. As a result, it is easy to separate the poem from Bradstreet's life circumstances and instead read it as a general statement on marriage. The speaker of the poem is thus two people at once, a real historical individual with a specific life and husband, and a generic advocate of the pleasures and benefits of marriage more broadly. Although written in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in North America, the setting of To My Dear and Loving Husband is vague and generic because the poet wants us to focus on the concept of love within marriage. It is this generality that makes the poem's themes universal and timeless. The poem is significant because we are given an insight into love and marriage from a woman's perspective, rare in the 17th century, also from the perspective of a married woman. We must wait another 200 years for more women poets to share their perspectives, including Barrett Browning and Rossetti. We are also witnessing the beginning of North American women poets. Anne Bradstreet was the first woman to be recognised as an accomplished New World poet. Her volume of poetry, The 10th Muse Lately Sprung Up in America, received considerable favourable attention when first published in London in 1650. 8 years after it appeared, it was listed by William London in his catalogue of the most vendable books in England, vendable meaning saleable, and George III is reported to have had the volume in his library. Anne Bradstreet's work has endured, and she is considered one of the most important North American poets. Bradstreet was well read. She benefited from the Elizabethan tradition that valued female education, and had extensive knowledge of English and continental poetry. In about 1628, the date is uncertain, Anne Dudley married Simon Bradstreet and remained married until her death on the 16th of September 1672. Bradstreet emigrated to the New World with her husband and parents in 1630. In 1633, Anne gave birth to the first of 7 children. The speaker's tone is one of bliss and contentment. In line 2, the reference to wife highlights one of the poem's major themes, her belief that marriage is the natural vehicle for love. It is a partnership that makes 2 people into one, and marriage should continue until a partner dies, and genuine love will continue in the afterlife. But are Anne Bradstreet's observations on marriage as relevant today as they were in the 17th century? To an increasingly secular population and society with diverse relationships, Anne Bradstreet promoting marriage may seem puzzling, outdated, even quaint. Yet many, whatever their sexual orientation, still see marriage as the formal affirmation of a lifelong commitment to another. Indeed, many have had to fight tirelessly for this recognition in law and theology. Whatever view we hold of marriage, Anne Bradstreet's poem reminds us that one ingredient for a happy marriage or relationship is to tell your partner regularly that you love and value them. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. If so, please hit the like button below. Also, check out our other videos on textual analysis and writing. If you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, it would be greatly appreciated if you would. Thank you so much. Until next time, write well.